Listen, you need to move out. We've decided to stay in his house. What? It's too crowded for us newly married couple to have everyone here. And this isn't even your house. If you don't like it, find your own place. Sophie can stay here if she wants. Kicking her out is unfair. My mom's words made me feel relieved, but my brother and his wife were still unhappy. This happened 5 years ago when my younger brother, right out of college, brought his girlfriend home and said he wanted to marry her. My name is Sophie. I'm 33 now, and my brother, who's 5 years younger, got married right after college. His wife was still in college, 3 years behind him. My brother and his wife really wanted to tie the knot right away, but our parents suggested waiting until she finished college. Oddly enough, her parents didn't mind either way. It seems like she's a carefree spender, and her folks just want her out of the house as soon as possible. We'll cover her tuition today, but after that, she's your responsibility. So anything other than her education isn't our concern, they said casually, not wanting to bother with rent. The newlyweds chose to stay with our parents. Thankfully, our dad, who used to be well off, owned a spacious old house. With enough space, it wasn't a big deal for them to live together. My dad grew up in a wealthy family, so he never faced money troubles like a regular worker. He hardly shared his thoughts, always wearing a smile and seeming a bit out of touch with reality. Mom often guided him, but I never saw him lose his temper. "I got a talking to from your mom again," he'd say with a chuckle. Dad was easygoing, taking everything in stride, which is probably why he and Mom got along so well. I adored Dad. He'd just laugh along when Mom scolded him. And so began the living arrangement with a newly married couple. My sister-in-law doesn't lift a finger around the house. She doesn't even bother with the vacuum or sorting her laundry from ours. Cooking? Forget about it. She waits for Mom or me to make meals. You could pitch in a bit, you know. I finally snapped, only to be accused of picking on her. "You're intimidating, sis. Maybe that's why you're still single at your age," she quipped, giggling. My brother just joins in her laughter. "At least do your own laundry. Isn't it embarrassing to have someone else wash your underwear, sis?" I thought we were all one big happy family. She'd fake tears for sympathy. My brother always took her side in moments like these. "Sophie, just because Emily is young and cute, don't get jealous and bully her. We're not here to be your servants. Living together means following some rules. Emily's a student, her main focus should be on her studies. We're family, so we should be able to cooperate, right?" He said this without any hint of remorse. Even though Mom suggested they get their own place and help us with rent, he brushed it off. "If we move out, it has to be a fancy apartment. We can't settle for something cheap," such selfishness. When I asked Dad to intervene, all he'd say is, "It's tough for just the two of them to manage. They're still young." And because of that, my brother and his wife felt even bolder. When I hit 30, I got engaged, and it was a stroke of luck. My future husband was a client from work, and we hit it off during meetings. He was thoughtful and kind, so when he asked me out and then proposed, I was over the moon. Finally tying the knot, surprised someone would want you. "Better make sure you don't mess it up," my brother remarked. "Glad you found a buyer. Can't wait for the busybody sister-in-law to be out of our hair." My parents chimed in, blessing our union wholeheartedly. I'd visit my parents occasionally, but my brother and his wife hadn't changed. She graduated the next year but didn't work or help around the house. When I tried to advise her, I was told I was a stranger now and shouldn't meddle. But I had a feeling they weren't leaving because they wanted to keep hold of the family assets. Deep down, they were probably relieved they didn't have to share them with me, now that I was married and gone. However, leaving doesn't mean I forfeited my rights to inherit. My brother and his wife probably understand this, but now that I'm not around, they might feel they can do as they please. When the time comes, I'd gladly give up my inheritance if they take good care of our parents and the house. But for now, I don't see any signs of that happening. About 2 years later, my father's health deteriorated, and he was in and out of the hospital. I pitched in with his care, visiting him as often as I could, but my brother and his wife seemed unconcerned. My father started mentioning his $20 million inheritance, and every time I visited, I noticed my sister-in-law sweet-talking on my father's side, saying, "Hey sis, I'd love to help out too, but Mom handles everything, and I never get the chance." "But you never showed interest in that before, did you?" "That's not entirely true, but don't you think Mom might be trying to keep us out of the loop to control the inheritance? Our parents are really close, and I think Mom wants to handle everything herself. I don't think she's thinking about it that way. Really? So you believe we'll get a fair share when Dad passes? Stop it. Don't talk about such unlucky things. Dad's still with us. I'm really frustrated with my brother and his wife, who seem to only care about money. But it's unclear if my father actually has that much wealth. While her family used to be well off, my father is just a regular salaryman. I can't imagine he has that much saved up. A year later, my father passed away. I hurried to the hospital as soon as I heard his condition had worsened suddenly, but when I arrived, he was already gone. The only solace was seeing how peaceful his face looked. I'm sure he was smiling, being looked after by Mom until the end. You're smiling, right, Dad? You were carefree till the very end. My husband left work early to join me, but my brother and his wife didn't show up at the hospital. When I reached out to my brother, he calmly responded, "If he's already gone, what's the point of rushing there?" My brother and his wife didn't seem to be grieving at the funeral. They were laughing and chatting. Right after the funeral, my brother wasted no time bringing up the topic of inheritance. As a couple, we'll inherit the $20 million from Dad. What? What do you mean? Did both you and Mom give up your shares? Can't we discuss this after the 49th day memorial? The funeral just happened today. Normally, it's better to settle financial matters later. We live in this house as a couple, and I'm the eldest son, so the inheritance is rightfully ours. Bringing this up right after Dad's passing didn't sit well with me. I didn't particularly care about the money, but it angered me that my brother assumed I'd agree with him. Fine, but in return you better take good care of Mom. Who would believe such words? My mother spoke before I could object. It's fine, dear. Arguing about this won't do any good, especially now. But Dad had just passed, and Mom was clearly feeling down. I couldn't just let it slide. This isn't something to decide right now. Let's head home for today, my husband, who had been quietly listening, intervened. I held back until now, but my husband couldn't stand it any longer. That's when we decided to leave. It doesn't feel right, especially after Dad's passing. I understand your feelings, but right now, I'm more worried about your mom. She's usually so strong, but she seems really down. I'm really worried about her too. I couldn't help but wonder why Mom agreed with my brother's stance so easily. Was she swayed by him and his wife? Mom and Dad were always a strong couple. Losing Dad must have hit her hard. Honestly, I'd rather be reminiscing about Dad right now. But my anger towards my brother is clouding everything. Since then, my brother and his wife kept bringing up renouncing the inheritance, but I refused to discuss it until after the 49th day. When the time came, they wasted no time bringing it up again. But once more, Mom urged me to give it up. If Mom says it's okay, then it must be okay, right? Are you sure about this? Won't you regret it later on? After all, Emily is Dad's daughter, so don't worry. Well, yeah, she's your wife. That's not what I meant. I meant she has a right to inherit. At this point, Emily's practically been adopted by our parents. What? I was stunned. When I glanced at Mom, she simply nodded. Adoption by in-laws isn't exactly unheard of, right? It's not common for a bride to be adopted, especially not a son-in-law. If Emily inherits, we'll pay less in inheritance tax than if I were the sole heir. I was shocked that he had thought about it so deeply, wondering when he started planning this. Even more surprising was that Mom agreed. And then they asked me to renounce the inheritance. Maybe Mom, being a mother now that Dad's gone, was worried about the future. But if it's Mom's decision, I suppose I can't argue. So I decided to send in the inheritance renunciation document. I don't want to argue about money anymore. Luckily, my husband isn't one to fuss over it, and he trusts me to make the decision about the inheritance. If renouncing it means Mom can live peacefully from now on, then it's the best choice. About a month later, my sister-in-law called me. It looks like your mom is losing her memory. What? But she's always been so tidy. The house must be a disaster if she's not cleaning. It was hard to believe my mom, who was usually meticulous about cleanliness, could leave laundry lying around and not bother to clean. And after she's just eaten, she yells at me, "I'm hungry. Are you trying to starve me? Can you imagine?" And I'm the one cooking for her. She's turned into a completely different person. Is it true? Have you taken her to the hospital? It seems unbelievable. She gets aggressive when I try to get her out, and it's embarrassing to be seen with her in public. Sam thinks I should just let her be, but I'm the one dealing with her all day and I'm at my wit's end. Honestly, I'm tired of it. So I decided to stop by my parents' house on my way home from work. I was speechless at the sight of my mother, who looked unrecognizable. She was sitting on her bed in dirty pajamas, hair unkempt, with vacant eyes. It's only been a month, but she's changed so much. It's clear she's not herself. Mom, you know who I am, right? What's happened to you? Who are you? My mother asked, tilting her head. This can't be real. I mean, look at her. She should be sitting, right? What's happening? And the room is a mess. How did it get this bad? Well, I don't know about all that, but you guys promised to look after Mom, didn't you? Taking care of an elderly woman isn't part of the agreement. There's no written contract when it comes to caring for parents. What are you talking about? In that case, dear sister-in-law, it's your turn to take care of her. I was going to do that without being asked. Let's go home, Mom, I said, attempting to lead her. But she stubbornly resisted. She wouldn't budge, shaking off my hand. Even when I tried to pull her, she clung to the bed, refusing to move. What's happened to you, Mom? I had no choice but to back off that day. Even when my husband and I returned the next day to fetch her, she still adamantly refused to move. I want to be with your father, she cried. It was hard to believe my mother had become like this. I have a job and can't visit her every day. That's why I want her to come to my house. But she refused to leave her old home. Sometime later, I received a call from my younger brother. Sis, we've moved. Really? Where to? Did you take Mom with you? I wouldn't drag around an elderly woman. She's just a burden. Sam, what's wrong with you? Mom mentioned Dad's valuable securities are in the safe deposit box. If we sell the house, we'll get around $20 million. What? It'll be a problem if Mom stays in that house forever. So sis, get Mom out of there as soon as possible. I'm relying on you. Wait, hold on. What are you saying? So that's the situation. Please take care of mother-in-law. As soon as my sister-in-law, who seemed to have taken over my brother's role, made that statement, the phone abruptly went dead. Despite repeatedly dialing, they didn't pick up. I left work early and rushed to my parents' house to persuade my mother to come to my place. I anticipated her usual resistance, but this time she quietly agreed, which was a relief. It seemed like Mom understood that nobody was staying in that house anymore. She remained silent during the drive home. But when we arrived, she suddenly perked up. Huh? Can I use your bathroom? She asked and hurried inside. I was perplexed and stood there, trying to make sense of it. The mother I just saw was unmistakably the same as before. What in the world is going on? I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. When my mother emerged from the bath, she requested some clothes. I quickly fetched her some of my own and a fresh set of underwear I bought for her. Ah, I feel so refreshed, she exclaimed with a bright smile, drying her hair with a towel. Mom, what's happening? I asked, just as my husband walked in. Like me, he looked stunned at the sight of my mother. Suddenly, my mother burst into laughter. That was quite the performance, wasn't it? I used to be in the drama club in high school. They say to deceive the enemy, you must first deceive your allies, and it seems to be true, doesn't it? So it turned out my mother was feigning senility. But why? I couldn't make sense of any of it. Just wait and see. That couple will do something worse soon. By that couple, do you mean Sam and his wife? Exactly. That couple's relationship is solely built on money. Then my mother proceeded to fill us in on what had transpired. Both my husband and I were amazed by my mother's cunning. The following week, my brother called, furious. Hey sis, you knew about this and didn't say anything, did you? What's going on? What are you suddenly talking about? There's no inheritance from Dad at all. When I checked the safety deposit box Mom mentioned, there were only loan agreements inside. So remember that $20 million? Well, that's actually a $20 million debt. Did you not bother to check? Typical of you, the only son in our family to inherit all of Dad's debts. Well, technically, that's still part of the inheritance. In the past, Dad, being too trusting, had acted as a guarantor for a friend's business without Mom's knowledge. The business failed, and the friend kept borrowing from Dad until it went bankrupt, leaving behind only the debt. And to make matters worse, the friend disappeared without a trace. It turns out that our family home had been put up as collateral due to the debt incurred back then. This might have even contributed to Dad developing dementia. It was only then that Mom found out about it. Dad kept saying there's a $20 million inheritance. Dad's words led my younger brother to mistakenly believe there was a hefty cash inheritance. So he and his wife decided to move in with our parents to seize as much money as possible. Dad, without suspecting anything, agreed to my brother's plan. But Mom saw through my brother's scheme and chose not to object. She knew he was so eager for the inheritance that she could simply hand it over to him. To shield Dad's dementia, Mom deliberately kept my brother and his wife away from him. And after Dad's passing, when my brother and his wife finally showed their true intentions, Mom pretended not to notice to observe their reaction. She bided her time for the right moment. Then I'll renounce the inheritance too. It's too late for that. Did you know you can only renounce an inheritance within 3 months of learning about it? We're well past that period now, so you two will have to shoulder the debt together. Mom had been waiting for this moment. She feigned senility until the deadline for renouncing the inheritance had passed. My brother's only goal in living with Mom was to extract information about Dad's inheritance. When the time came, Mom casually mentioned the safety deposit box as if it had just occurred to her. With the information they needed, my brother and his wife swiftly left the house. All along, they had been playing into Mom's hands. Emily is threatening divorce if she doesn't get any money. But legally, she's Dad's child, so she can't escape the debt even with a divorce, right? I see, but I quit my job, thinking I could live a life of luxury with $20 million. But I don't have that kind of money. Oh dear, you've really gotten yourself into a mess, haven't you? So, naturally you'll help me out, right? Why should I help you? You're the one who pushed Mom and me to renounce the inheritance, so I shouldn't be involved anymore. Well, thanks to you, I'm in this mess. I'm sure Dad is crying tears of joy to have such a dutiful son. Good luck paying back the debt. The family home was seized due to the mortgage, leaving the land and house, worth nearly $720,000, insufficient to cover the debt. My brother and his wife struggled to make repayments while their marriage suffered under the strain of financial stress. As Mom predicted, they eventually divorced, consumed by constant money disputes. Mom agreed to dissolve the adoption, making Emily a stranger to us. She likely hoped this would absolve her of the debt, but reality is unforgiving. Despite the dissolution, Emily still inherited the debt from her father's passing. You deceived me. My sister-in-law stormed in, her anger palpable. However, we hadn't intended to deceive her. Mom was heartbroken to see my brother and his wife happily calculating money instead of mourning their father's death. She remained silent, overwhelmed by their greed. Their behavior served as a cautionary tale of the consequences of unchecked greed. Afterward, my brother continued to pester us for money, prompting us to relocate without informing him. To my surprise, I discovered that Dad had taken out a substantial life insurance policy with Mom and me as beneficiaries. Despite his passing, he had diligently kept up with the premiums. The fact that my brother wasn't listed as a beneficiary left me questioning whether Dad had been aware of the situation all along. Despite his seemingly carefree demeanor, perhaps the true strategist in our family wasn't Mom, but Dad. He had once murmured, "There's a $20 million inheritance. Whether intentional or not, I can't say for certain now. My husband and I used the insurance payout as a down payment on a new home." Meanwhile, my brother and his ex-wife seemed to be working while dealing with pressure from loan sharks. Their troubles were no longer my concern. Even after our move, my brother persisted in contacting us, demanding to know our whereabouts. That's when I mentioned the insurance money. "You renounced the inheritance, so that money should be mine," he shouted. However, inheritance renouncement and life insurance are distinct matters. Unlike inheritance, life insurance payouts go directly to the named beneficiary. I explained this to him and promptly blocked my brother and former sister-in-law's contact details. Now we're enjoying a peaceful life as a family of 3. Mom is thriving both physically and mentally, the epitome of good health. My husband and I pray that she continues to live a long and fulfilling life.
My parents liked my twin sister more than me. They spent all the money they were saving for my wedding on her. So I stopped talking to them after saying no to my mom's selfish request. I'm 23 years old and have a twin sister named Allison. We don't get along. Actually, we don't even talk. The same goes for my parents. We used to talk, even though they didn't treat me well. But for the past 2 years, I've stayed away from them, and they haven't tried to contact me until now. Allison is 12 minutes older than me, so she's automatically the favorite because she's older. My parents only wanted one child because that's what they had planned for, and they couldn't afford to raise two. But when they found out they were having twins, it was too late to change their plans, and Mom didn't want to take any risks. I learned about this when I was in high school from my uncle, who was drunk at a Thanksgiving party. That was the day I gave up trying to make my parents like me. In those circumstances, they did the most typical thing. They had two children but chose to only love one, which happened to be Allison, not me. Since we were kids, the competition between me and Allison was intense. Whatever she did, I tried to do better just to get our parents' approval, but it only made them dislike me more for outshining their favorite. Honestly, Allison wasn't even that interested in being better than me. She just wanted people to praise her, so she pretended to care about our competition. I have to admit, she was skilled at manipulation, making people believe she was genuinely hurt when I outdid her. This resulted in many people validating her and putting me down to make her feel better. These people included my parents, some relatives, and even some classmates from high school. So in the end, I got good grades and participated in many activities to outshine my sister, while she received attention, validation, and sympathy from my parents and others because I was seen as the bad guy for overshadowing her. Looking back, I wouldn't change my achievements, but I do wish I had rubbed them in her face more. Then 2 years ago, we turned 21 and had both graduated. She graduated from a regular college, while I graduated from one of the top business schools in the state. Not only that, I was the valedictorian and had received a scholarship, which saved my parents a lot of money on my education. You might think I'm crazy, but I actually hoped my parents would be happy for me. Instead, they focused all their attention on Allison and her uncertain future because she had barely passed her studies. Both of us had moved back home, but while I was already working as an intern from home, Allison was struggling to find a job and facing rejection after rejection. My parents were more concerned about her, barely acknowledging my achievements or congratulating me. I wasn't surprised, but I was definitely disappointed. I tried to hide my feelings because I was still living with them and hadn't saved enough to move out yet, so I kept quiet about how hurt I was. But after our 21st birthday, I couldn't take it anymore. I expected them to do something special for us. But the day before our birthday, I found out they had all gone to the beach with Allison and her friends, leaving me alone at home with just a note and a $50 gift card. I felt utterly shattered. They had taken Allison on a beach trip while I got nothing but a brief note and a small gift. Many things have been unfair in my childhood, but this was the last straw. It was so disappointing and heartless that I decided to move out that very day and never look back. I had a few friends who offered to let me stay with them until I could find my own place, which wouldn't take long because the company I was interning at was likely going to hire me after the internship. So I only needed a place to stay for a maximum of 2 months. I packed my things and moved in with a friend without telling my parents or sister, and I haven't looked back since. They didn't miss me enough to ask me to come back. They did call me the day after I moved out, but not to wish me a happy birthday. They wanted to inform me that they'd be back soon and mentioned that I should probably fix the leaky tap. I told them I had moved out, hoping for some kind of reaction, but there was none. My parents seemed fine with it, and Allison didn't care. That was the last meaningful conversation I had with my family. Since then, I haven't visited them, and they haven't reached out to me either. Occasionally, I'd hear about Allison from my friends, but that was the extent of my knowledge about her life. They were unaware of my parents, and my parents knew little about me. Over the past 2 years, I've worked hard and now have my own place. It's not extravagant, but it's a comfortable apartment in a good neighborhood. The rent is manageable with my income, which is quite an achievement considering the struggles many people my age face. I'm content with how my life has unfolded, and I've made a conscious effort to keep thoughts of my family at bay. I recently learned that Allison got married to a businessman much older than her and is now enjoying life in California. I thought everything was fine with my family until 2 days ago when my uncle called informing me that my parents had been in a serious car accident and wanted to see me urgently. I hurried to the hospital as soon as I could because, despite everything, I'm not heartless. When I arrived, I learned that they had already been there for a couple of days, recovering from their injuries. Their car had been hit by a truck, and although they survived, they were seriously hurt. Unfortunately, they didn't have health insurance because my dad believed in self-sufficiency and thought we wouldn't need hospital care. It's one of the most absurd beliefs I've ever encountered. They had initially reached out to my sister, but she refused to come back or assist them. She felt it was inappropriate for our parents to ask for financial help from her wealthy husbands so soon after her wedding. She didn't want to appear like a gold digger to her spouse. She refused to return because she felt she couldn't abandon her home and her two stepchildren, who weren't biologically hers, but her husband's from a previous marriage. She was busy playing the role of a happy family with her husband's relatives, neglecting her own parents in the hospital after a severe car accident. Even as she wanted to help with the bills, she couldn't afford to, as she was solely dependent on her husband. It was a harsh reality check, shattering the illusion of being the favored daughter and the golden child. I was shocked that they hadn't even bothered to contact me first. When my uncle mentioned that my parents now expected me to cover their medical expenses, I was furious. The amount was substantial, and it would take me a long time to recover financially. I hesitated to spend so much, especially on people who had never shown me any love or care throughout my life. I knew they had other family members who could take care of them, and even if I didn't pay, someone else would step in. It's just that it would be more embarrassing for them to borrow money from others, and they'll likely have to repay it much sooner than they would have to repay me. They explained this while asking me to cover the bills and even promised a quick repayment. So I'm torn. I can either refuse to pay, saving myself from humiliation, or I can cover their expenses, sacrificing my own money and waiting for reimbursement. Honestly, I'm not inclined to help them at all. We haven't spoken in 2 years, and our relationship has been strained for as long as I can remember. They feel like strangers to me now, so I don't feel compelled to assist them. But then again, if I don't help, I'm no better than Allison, which is disheartening. So I'm unsure what to do. Update 1. Hi there, I've made the tough decision not to assist my parents. It wasn't easy, but I'm confident their medical expenses will be covered by other means. They only reached out to me because they were too proud to ask other relatives for help. I haven't informed them of my decision yet. How do you even begin to tell your family you won't be assisting with their medical bills after a serious accident? It's been nearly 5 days since I last saw them, and after reflecting on the comments, I realized I was still unconsciously competing with Allison. Seeing that she didn't offer assistance to our parents, I felt compelled to prove I was the better daughter. I suppose I'll always have that competitive streak, no matter how hard I try. It's become a part of who I am. Many comments rightfully criticized my parents' lack of health insurance, and I couldn't agree more. My father's decision to forego insurance, thinking he was a flawless driver, was incredibly foolish. If I had been involved in their lives, I would have insisted on insurance. He didn't even insure his car, which adds to the recklessness of his choices. They're fortunate that the accident was the truck driver's fault. Otherwise, they'd be responsible for covering the car repairs as well. As for their financial situation, which many of you inquired about, I'd say my parents are comfortable. They're neither wealthy nor struggling. My dad holds a managerial position in his company, and my mom works in HR at a smaller firm. Together, their income is sufficient, especially now that they no longer have to support me or Allison. While growing up, we never faced financial stress, but we also couldn't live extravagantly. We were solidly middle class, and that hasn't changed. I can't understand why my parents wouldn't be able to cover their own medical bills. If they can borrow money with the promise of repayment, they should be able to manage their expenses themselves. They haven't explained the reason to me, and I doubt I'll find out anytime soon. Update 2. I finally mustered the courage to inform my parents that I wouldn't be assisting with their expenses. They had been calling me persistently for the past week, and yesterday I realized I couldn't keep ignoring them until they were discharged from the hospital. So I answered their calls and explained my decision. As expected, they didn't react well. My mom unleashed her anger on me, despite her broken ribs, accusing me of being ungrateful, among other things. My dad simply disowned me and hung up after my mom finished berating me. Surprisingly, their reaction didn't hurt as much as I anticipated. I realized I hadn't felt loved by them in a long time. They hadn't made any effort to contact me or check on me for 2 years after I moved out following their neglect on an important birthday. So I've never really had parents anyway. I'll just continue living my life as I have been for the past 2 years, and even before that. Their reaction doesn't affect me as much as they thought it would. After the call with my parents, my uncle called to give me an earful, but I hung up after a few seconds because I didn't need that negativity from others. Whatever they think of me doesn't matter anymore. My uncle later texted me, informing me that my parents had decided to use the money from the fund they had set aside for our wedding, now that they were in need. They had already used more than half of the wedding fund for Allison's wedding, and whatever was left they spent on a trip to Europe. This left them with little savings, explaining why they couldn't cover their own expenses. So that mystery was solved. My uncle may have intended to make me feel guilty, but instead I felt relieved that I hadn't contributed my hard-earned money to my parents' bills. Their irresponsible spending was their own doing, not mine. Their lack of insurance due to their delusional beliefs wasn't my responsibility either. They could turn to their relatives for help or fend for themselves. I wasn't giving them anything. They were no longer entitled to my time or my money. Update 3. Something really strange happened today, and I need to talk about it. I haven't been able to confide in my friends because most of them don't know much about my family history, and I'm not ready to share it with them yet. So I'm turning to Reddit for support. It's been almost 2 weeks since I last spoke to my parents. A few hours ago in the evening, Allison unexpectedly showed up at my doorstep. I was taken aback by her sudden visit, especially because I didn't think she knew where I lived. It turns out one of our old high school friends disclosed the neighborhood I lived in, and Allison went to great lengths to locate me, which was surprising given our strained relationship. She also looks and acts very differently from what I remembered. She's become more refined and sophisticated, I think, and that's been a huge difference because earlier she used to talk like she was still in high school, but now she sounds more ladylike somehow and even behaves better. Her way of dressing has changed, the jewelry she wears has changed, and even her makeup. It actually felt like I wasn't even talking to Allison today. Everything about her is aged all of a sudden, but one thing that hasn't changed is how she is a person. I guess you cannot put makeup on your heart and tell people to call it Mrs. Davis, like she did with herself. Her personality and beliefs haven't undergone any renovation for sure. I let her in after she knocked at my door, and I was really surprised to see her, but I was also curious to know why she'd come by, so I decided to talk to her. After some small talk about her life, where she told me everything that she'd been up to unprompted and bragged about how fabulous her life was as a stay-at-home mom of 2 toddlers married to a wealthy guy without anything to worry about except for her cuticles. I waited for her to get to the point while politely nodding at her boring speech about how wonderfully underrated being a traditional housewife was. She was even advising me to do the same, so I really couldn't wait for her to finish talking about irrelevant things and get to the damn point, which she did after about 15 minutes of talking about her life. She explained that she had returned on her own initiative because our parents had been pleading for her to visit them after the accident. They didn't ask for her financial assistance, but simply wanted her presence. After 2 weeks, she finally decided to come back and thought it was also an opportunity to reconcile with me. However, things took a turn when she began venting about our parents' neediness and how they were disrespecting her new family. She complained about having to leave her 2 children with their nanny just to visit them, expressing frustration at being forced to choose between her parents and her own kids. I couldn't comprehend why she kept referring to her stepchildren as her own. She divulged a lot about her marriage and her husband, unsolicited. From what I gathered, it seemed like her husband had only married her to improve his chances of gaining partial custody of his children, which he successfully achieved. She believed he genuinely cared for her. He had been embroiled in a custody battle for some time, being a busy businessman unable to dedicate enough time to his children. His ex-wife used this against him until he announced his engagement, signaling stability, which swayed the court in his favor. Allison proudly recounted how she had stepped in to save these children, but to me, it seemed like her husband had manipulated her. Their relationship had barely lasted a year before he proposed, indicating that his motives might not have been purely romantic. It's unlikely that genuine love blossoms so quickly, especially after a divorce. Perhaps Allison was oblivious to this or chose to overlook it for financial security, content with being a glorified nanny to her husband's children. Furthermore, she resented her own parents for expecting her presence after their serious accident, feeling it encroached on her time with her new family. Her new family, however, comprised a husband who may not have held much affection for her and two unrelated children who were just as content with their nanny as they were with her. If there ever was a picture-perfect definition of ungratefulness, it would be embodied by Allison. Though I'm no champion of my parents, hearing her complain about their alleged neediness left me astounded. It was hard to believe that this was the same girl they had favored repeatedly over me. Eventually, she got to the purpose of her visit and informed me she would depart in 2 days. Despite promising our parents she would stay for a month, she felt exhausted from their repetitive recounting of the accident and their ordeal, claiming she needed to return home soon. Now, she expected me to reconcile with our parents and essentially take her place, relieving her of the guilt of abandoning them in their time of need. Unaware that our parents had severed ties with me once again due to my refusal to cover their expenses, she likely assumed they hadn't mentioned it to her, as they rarely talk about me. She sought sympathy from me for having to deal with our parents and leaving her own family behind. Her plan was to leverage this sympathy to manipulate me into becoming our parents' emotional support, as she didn't feel capable of fulfilling that role herself. It was a classic tactic of Allison's, but I saw through it and refused to play along. I had no intention of revealing this to her during her stay at my house, knowing it would lead to conflict. Instead, I gave her a vague assurance that I would try to reconcile, though I knew I had no intention of doing so. She left after urging me to stay in touch, though we both knew she didn't mean it. Frankly, I was relieved to see her go. Not only was she a self-centered and manipulative individual, but she was also dreadfully dull to converse with. Her monotonous tales of life in California left little room for meaningful dialogue. Her life seems to revolve around parties, her stepchildren, and her husband. While she believes she's living the dream, I find it rather pitiful. It's evident that her husband's affection is lacking, and with her stepchildren spending significant time with their biological mother, it's likely they'll always favor her. Yet this is the path she has chosen, and as for me, I'm determined to create a life far removed from my family. Today reaffirmed my decision to distance myself from my parents and sister. They're selfish and callous, with little regard for anyone but themselves, especially Allison. It's disheartening to be associated with such individuals. However, I finally cut ties with all of them, blocking their contacts to ensure my peace of mind. I hope they respect my boundaries and refrain from contacting me in the future. I'm better off without them, and I pray it stays that way. Next month, we're going back to live with my parents. My husband Ben told his sister-in-law Holly. To our surprise, she seemed really happy about it. But when moving day came, I got a ton of calls. After unpacking, I found out that Holly had given out the wrong address. I didn't get to hear the full story and felt really upset. My name's Jane, I'm 35, just an ordinary office worker. I live with my husband Ben and our fourth-grade child. We both work hard to make ends meet and have a happy family life. Everything was going smoothly. Then Holly came to visit. At first, she said she just wanted to hang out, so we welcomed her warmly. But she started showing up unannounced every few days, acting more and more arrogant each time. Holly knew when I finished work and would time her visits accordingly, making herself at home and helping herself to our food and drinks. It got so bad that she even started eating our kids' snacks. I tried talking to her about it, but she wouldn't listen. Instead, She'd get mad and impossible to deal with. Lately, she's been coming over every single day, and Ben and I are worried sick about how to make her stop. Hey, you didn't get anything today, even though you knew I was coming. I felt like sighing at her behavior. I didn't buy anything. If you want to eat, you can get it yourself, I replied calmly. But as soon as I said that, Holly started yelling loudly. Don't mess with me. I'm a guest. You should treat me. And this is your house, right? It's only fair for you to pay for everything, she shouted aggressively, thinking it would make me give in. She was really selfish and difficult to deal with. Holly, we didn't get a call before you came. Isn't it common courtesy to let us know beforehand if you want to visit as a guest? I said, noticing Holly's shoulders tense up, causing her to spill her tea. How dare you? You're my sister-in-law. Is this how you treat family? I'll make sure everyone hears about this, she retorted angrily, despite being the one causing the inconvenience. Reflecting back, I remembered how different she was before. When I first met her at my in-laws' house, she and her husband Ken were so welcoming. They made me feel at ease, which helped me bond with my in-laws and eventually marry Ben. But now she seemed like a completely different person. When I tried to ask her if something had happened with her in-laws, she refused to talk about it. At first, I tried to be supportive, but as her unannounced visits and rude behavior continued, I grew frustrated. My attempts to distance myself only seemed to escalate her actions further. I need a drink. Go buy it? Now, Holly ordered me while I was busy cooking, almost pushing me out the door as if she wanted me gone. She threw my bag, which was in the living room, outside. Despite feeling frustrated and wanting to refuse, I grabbed my bag. But Holly blocked the doorway, refusing to let me back in until I got what she wanted. Please stop this. My husband will be home soon, and our child will be back from their friend's house, I pleaded, but Holly remained unmoved. I don't care. If you stop complaining and go now, you'll be back in time, she said firmly, blocking the entrance like a stubborn gatekeeper. Realizing arguing would be futile and only waste time, I reluctantly headed to the nearby supermarket to buy the alcohol Holly demanded. When I got back home, my kids had returned, and I found my sister-in-law, Holly, making my child clean up the tea she had spilled, acting all high and mighty. I quickly went to my child and shot a stern look at Holly. Please, don't do this again. You spilled the tea, so you need to clean it up, I firmly told her. But instead of acknowledging her mistake, Holly just started drinking the wine she had taken from me, saying, "It's your fault for being so slow." I told my child to take their things to their room and rushed through the rest of the cleaning. As I cooked, my frustration grew, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was any way to put a stop to Holly's unacceptable behavior. I talked to my husband, Ben, about Holly's behavior, and he was just as upset as I was, especially about what she did to our child. He said he'd call his brother right away to address the situation, but when he tried, he returned with a frown, saying the call wouldn't go through. We both looked at his phone, puzzled, wondering what could be causing the issue. Feeling disgusted by Holly's actions, we had been wanting to visit my in-laws, but finding a suitable day amidst our busy schedules was proving difficult. Despite our worries, we decided to plan a visit for next month and left it at that. The following day, I mentioned to Holly that we were planning to visit my in-laws, but she didn't seem interested in the details and strongly objected to our decision for some reason. Holly's yelling only added to our confusion. Why was she so adamant about us not going to my in-laws' house? As I pondered over this, I received more troubling news the next day. My mom called to inform me that my dad had fallen down the stairs and been injured, needing caregiving. Although it wasn't serious, my parents were clearly distressed. I offered to go home immediately, but my mom insisted that I prioritize my children and not worry about them. Both of my parents are over 65, still working senior jobs despite being retired to support themselves. With my dad now needing care, it would put extra strain on my mom, juggling caregiving and work. Their lives would undoubtedly be affected. I couldn't help but wonder what I could do to help them. With a heavy heart, I finished work for the day and headed home. That evening, Holly showed up at our house as usual after the kids got back from school, expecting dinner to be ready. It was a routine thing for her. I glanced at Holly with a bit of resentment. I had hoped to talk to Ben about my parents that night, but with Holly around, it seemed challenging. Could we skip dinner tonight? I bought a cake, I suggested, offering her the cake instead. Holly frowned and shot me a glare. What do you mean? You expect me to just eat cake? That's absurd. We have our own issues too. I'm sorry, but could you just take this and go home? I asked, hoping she'd understand. Reluctantly, Holly eyed the cake. I tried telling her, you don't have to eat it if you don't want to, but she ignored me and ended up eating it anyway before heading back home. After discussing with Ben, who had just returned home, we realized we couldn't afford to fully support my parents every month, but we still wanted to help. Ben suggested doing more overtime, but I didn't want to overburden him either. That's when we had a brilliant idea to solve both the issue with my brother's wife and my parents' situation. Ben agreed, and we immediately got to work. While Ben started packing our things, I called my parents, and he dialed Holly's number. We're moving back to my parents' place next month. We won't be around when you visit, Ben told her over the phone. Holly seemed thrilled at the news. Well, I should start getting ready too, she replied casually before hanging up. We were left wondering what she meant by that. Oh well, never mind, we shrugged and ended the call. On moving day, as we began unpacking at my parents' house, we were bombarded with frantic calls from Holly. I quickly answered, trying to calm her down. When she finally composed herself, she blurted out, "Your new place is..." I was puzzled and interrupted her, saying, "Wait, it's my parents' home. We're moving back here, remember?" There was a sharp intake of breath from Holly on the other end of the line. "Parents' home? Ben mentioned it, so I thought you were moving here," she exclaimed, catching me off guard. I turned to Ben, who was playing with our child nearby, and asked if he had clarified that it was my parents' home. Before I could finish explaining, the call abruptly ended. "Anyway, it's not a big deal, right? You also said..." "Well, never mind," Holly retorted, signaling the misunderstanding. "I'm sorry, Holly, but we didn't move to your parents' home. We've already finished moving," Ben tried to clarify, but Holly had already hung up on me while I was explaining. Frustrated, she started blaming me for the confusion. When I asked about her plans, Holly revealed something surprising. "I thought you'd unload all the tedious house chores onto us when you moved in," she said, leaving me speechless. Ignoring her condescending tone, I explained why we made the decision to move. "Your frequent visits were becoming overwhelming, Holly." Around the same time, my mom informed me that my dad had been injured and needed care. When Ben and I discussed it, we thought moving back to my parents' home would help keep you at bay and allow us to assist my mom. Holly's response was simply a threatening "huh." My parents' home is conveniently located near our child's school and close to our workplaces, so the move went smoothly, like hitting two targets with one shot. We had planned to explain this to Holly, but she abruptly ended the call, so we didn't feel responsible for the misunderstanding. "Come and move here immediately," Holly demanded, her voice rising, but I firmly declined. While living with Holly's family didn't sound bad, I couldn't bear the thought of being taken advantage of. Plus, my parents are going through a tough time right now. Despite my explanation, Holly refused to accept it. "So, you won't listen to me?" Suddenly, we heard Ben's brother's voice on the line. Holly gasped and stepped back. "Is everything okay, Holly?" I inquired, concerned. Holly pleaded urgently, "Please, just come over now." "What's wrong?" "Hurry up." I wondered why my sister-in-law was so frantic. Holly's urgency left me speechless, and then she abruptly ended the call. After hanging up, I filled Ben in on my sister-in-law's urgent plea, and he grunted in response. "Guess we better check it out," he said, offering to drive. Amidst the chaos of just having moved and dealing with various tasks, I quickly arranged for my parents to watch the kids while we visited my in-laws. Luckily, they were both home and agreed to help out, allowing Ben and me to go together. Upon reaching my in-laws' house, I rushed into the living room. There, I found Holly looking dejected, while my mother-in-law and brother-in-law appeared furious. They offered us tea and explained the situation as soon as they saw us. Holly ran away from home after we confronted her about her reckless spending. We've been trying to reach her, but she's been avoiding us, my brother-in-law explained, shooting a glare at Holly. I was stunned to hear this revelation. I hadn't realized Holly had left home. Ben shared my disbelief, giving Holly a questioning look. Apparently, Holly had even dipped into my savings. I had been trying to contact her to retrieve my money, but she had been unreachable. Today, she had suddenly returned home. Hearing about our move-in plans, they assumed it was a misunderstanding. Surprised? I instinctively shook my head. Then Holly, who had been quiet until now, spoke up defiantly. "Mom, it's your fault for interfering in my life. I spent the money to ease your stress." "It's not a big deal." She slammed her fist on the table, her face flushed. But neither my mother-in-law nor brother-in-law backed down. "Stop making excuses. You quit your job suddenly and expected us to do all the housework and cooking. How can you claim to be stressed?" "Exactly. You spend all the money we earn on designer bags. It's unacceptable." They both raised their voices angrily, their faces red. Holly, showing no remorse, simply looked away, not taking the situation seriously. We had no clue about the turmoil brewing in my in-laws' home. My brother-in-law's voice rose sharply. "Enough is enough. Are you also causing trouble for my younger brother? If you're so unhappy, let's just get divorced. Stay out of our lives." Holly's face drained of color, panic evident in her eyes. Wait. Why does it have to come to that?" "I was just trying to take care of you two," she pleaded. Ben and I exchanged a sigh. "It was us who took care of you. You came over every day, ate and drank whatever you wanted from our home, even had dinner without contributing or lifting a finger to help." I interjected, earning a sharp glare from my brother-in-law. "That's because it's your house. I'm a guest, so why should I pay?" Holly spoke selfishly, leaving us speechless. My determined brother-in-law retrieved divorce papers. "I've had enough, Holly. Sign these and leave. Stay away from this house and my younger brothers." Holly was taken aback by his resolve. "And you need to repay Mom's savings in full. We'll settle it through a lawyer." Holly's shock was palpable, her face paling. "I wonder how much she spent," I mused, noting her reaction. "I don't have that kind of money, Jane. Both you and Ben are working, right? You must have some spare." Holly, flustered, turned to me for assistance. I shook my head, meeting her gaze. "We simply can't afford it. We have our parents' healthcare expenses, our children's support payments, and our own living costs to consider. You'll have to find a solution on your own," I explained firmly, and finally, Holly accepted the reality and gave up. Following her brother-in-law's ultimatum, Holly was obligated to fully reimburse her mother-in-law's money. She enlisted a lawyer and had the arrangement officially documented to ensure accountability. Her brother-in-law informed us of this development and offered another apology, saying, "I'm sorry for getting you involved." We felt a sense of relief knowing that our concerns had been addressed. Interestingly, it appears that all the food and drink consumed by Holly at our house was also included in the mother-in-law's claim. While full repayment might be challenging due to the lack of detailed records, some restitution may be possible. My husband and I express our gratitude to my brother-in-law. It turns out that Holly had borrowed money to cover her expenses during her absence and is now struggling with that debt as well. Meanwhile, I've been dedicating my time to assisting my mom at my parents' home. With Holly no longer a source of concern, most of my stress has dissipated. Moving forward, I'm committed to working diligently to safeguard my cherished parents and family.